What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be reviewing the M16 and S16 controllers from Haute42. Now, they did send these out to me, but they gave me no instructions on the video, and all opinions are my own. So in the package, it comes with the foam on the top and bottom to avoid it from scratching in transit, and it's also fairly compact. So now, taking a look inside, we can see the controller, and it has a good amount of heft to it because it is their metal design. And if we take a look at the back, we can see that they already have the rubber feet pre-installed, so when you're playing, it won't slip around. So next up, we have our manual with instructions for shortcuts, pinouts, and configuration of GB2040 CE. And then nestled underneath, we have our USB-C cable to plug it into our console, as well as our accessories packet with our spare Haute V2 switch puller, and menu button caps. So in the package, we get our controller, our manual, our USB-C cable, and our spare accessories. So now with the S16, we have the same accessories packet, but with the addition of clear rubber feet to install on the back of our device, along with our white USB-C cable. Now we can kind of see that it is similar to the T16 layout with the Haute V2s, and the difference in that is that it is obviously smaller, but also that all of the buttons are small, and then they have a big jump button, which is different from all of their other layouts. So now with both controllers side by side, we can see the size difference. And the first thing I wanted to point out on the S16 was the smaller buttons for everything except for our jump button, which is reminiscent of the standard Leverless layout, as this one is bigger than all of the rest. While on the M16 and their other controllers, the buttons are all the same, including our jump button. So now the next thing is our input reader. So this one I've kept stock, and this one I've updated to the latest configuration of the firmware. So as you can see on this one, it has the standard Leverless layout. So all of these buttons work as normal, and you can see them on the input reader. But our L3 buttons and our R3 button do not show up, but our up button shows up, but it shows up as this button. On the updated version, we have all of our buttons in view, right? So if I press my R3 button, you can see that. But our L3 buttons, they are linked together, but you can at least see them. And the same goes for our up buttons. So next, we have the start button, the select button, the home, and our touchpad, as well as our turbo button. And then we have our options for whichever side we want to plug in the cable. And then we have our USB slot for USB pass-through for added console compatibility with necessary adapters. And then now on the M16, we have our start, select, home, touchpad, R3, L3, and our turbo button. Now if we look at the top of this one, you can see our USB pass-through is right there. And taking a closer look, we can see a thick metal top, a acrylic layer in the middle, and a thin metal layer at the bottom with our rubber feet and our boot cell button hidden right there. And then these use a 6-star pattern screw shape. I'm not sure what they're called, but yeah. And then on the S16, we just have standard Phillips head screws, so this will be easy to open up and add art if you want to. Now additionally, for the input reader on this one, you can see a little row of inputs. So if I press my buttons, you'll see them coming up one by one. And then it'll also remember the combination of inputs. So if I press these two buttons, it'll say X plus Y. Or if I press my right button and X, it'll say right plus X. And one thing I wanted to point out is that these aren't labeled, and it would be really nice if they had like laser engravings. That way we could see what each button was for, because I had to go in and test it, but it's not too much of a problem. The buttons also come at a slight angle that works with your fingers, so I just found that to be quite neat. And on the back of the S16, we have this stacked acrylic design, and this is really light. Like in comparison to this has a good amount of heft, but this just feels like paper almost. Now, another notable thing is that when you try to remove the keycaps, you also end up pulling out the key switch along with it, so they might not be seated super tightly. So right here, I have the keycap removed, right? But before, when I try to take it out, the whole switch would come out. Now, it seems to be working fine, and they come out nicely. but the key switch actually pops up a little and you need to press it back down. Now on the T16 model, this isn't an issue, and the key switch remains firm. Now I did replace them with these clear keycaps that they offer for this model. They don't sell them separately, but they did give me them to showcase the RGB and the sound test. So swapping them around, there's no permanent issues with the controller and they work normally. And I had no issues with them wiggling around or disconnecting, so it only happens when you're modding it. So now what's it like to play on these? They're both small controllers, so playing on a table is definitely the best way to use them. I like to use controllers in my lap, but playing them on my table is actually really fun. Now the weight of the M16 allows you to play in your lap, and it's also fairly big, so you're less likely to have any problems with lap play, but it does end up slipping around. For the S16, it's much smaller and doesn't have that weight to keep it down, so I'd recommend it even more for desk play. The M16 has a really premium feel to it with the smoothness and weight of the aluminum, and its price seems like it would be much higher than what it is considering what you get, especially when you look at options like the Razer Kitsune, which is about 3 times the price. The buttons are satisfying to press, and the metal sets it apart from the texture of plastic designs of other controllers, making it nice and sturdy like a high-end controller. The S16 is like a mini travel-sized T16, and the feel of the small keycaps on the switches creates a nice light press. There's something really satisfying to the light feel of the S16, and its form factor and weight make it perfect to carry around. And even though it's small, the button spacing is perfect, making it comfortable to play on. Now for the firmware, to update it, you'll want to locate the boot cell button on the back. It's a tiny gold button, and you'll want something like a mechanical pencil or a toothpick to press it as you plug it into your computer. The first choice of firmware we have is the general Haute42 specific configuration of the 0.7.6 version of GP2040CE. We also have controller specific configurations to match the specificities of each device, and at the moment there is no specific firmware for the S16, but the T16 firmware does work for it. For all of our options, we will want to download the flash nuke file along with our firmware file to remove any existing firmware. Once you've updated your controller, you can make your way to this URL to access the web configurator. Now the first thing I would recommend is making a backup of your current configuration. That way if anything goes bad, you can always restore your file. So first, go to the configuration tab, data backup and restoration, and save a copy of your configuration. That way you can load it if anything goes wrong. Next up, we'll want to go to the settings page, change our input mode to PS4, and for the controller setting here, this will be the default option and you'll have 8-minute timeout unless you upload your keys from your DualShock 4. Now if we change the setting to arcade stick, this will be in use for when you're using an adapter. That way you have access to PS4 and PS5 play. Scrolling down a little lower, we'll see our boot input modes, which are the buttons we'll press when plugging it into a different console. So we'll press A for Nintendo Switch, B for PC, X for PS3, Y for PS4 and PS5, and R1 for Xbox One. And then after making your changes, scroll down and press save. Now we'll make our way to the add-ons section. And here we can edit multiple things like disabling turbo if we don't need it, and we can change the button to work for something else in the pin mapping section. We can disable dual directional input if we don't want multiple buttons having the same directional input. And here we have PS4 mode and PS pass-through. We'll only be using one at a time. So if you're using PS4 keys, you will use this and disable PS pass-through. But if you're using PS pass-through, you'll have it enabled and disable PS4 mode. Now at the bottom, we will see the input history, which is the bottom row in our input viewer. If you want to see these inputs, you can disable them and you'll still see those button highlights, but not the input history at the bottom. Then you'll want to make sure to hit save again after making your changes. Next up, in the LED configuration tab, we can change things like the brightness of our buttons, as well as which buttons actually have our LEDs enabled. And then in the display section, you can change the image here to a custom 128 by 64 image that is black and white. And we can change how long it shows up before switching to the input viewer. Or you can change it to always show that image if you set the value to 0. For the pin mapping section, I wanted to cover mainly tournament legal options. So our first one is our double up inputs with this button and this button both being up. If you want a WASD layout, you'll want to make your way here, disable the pin 2, and set your pin 27 to just be up. Now if you want this bottom button to be your up button and this one to be unmapped, go ahead and disable pin 27 and don't make any changes to pin 2. For our two L3 buttons, if you want this bottom left button to be your L3, go ahead and disable your pin 18 and that'll do it. If you want this top button to be your L3 button and to disable this one, go ahead and disable pin 26. Now if you do end up disabling pin 18, it also disables this button, as this button and this button are both linked up physically, so it will take out both of the buttons. So for our right stick button, this is mapped to this one physically as well, so you technically will have two buttons with the same input, but I'm not sure how much that weighs into tournament legality, as this is just a small menu option button and you're not really going to be pressing it. So now that you've made and saved all of your changes, you can press the reboot button at the top right, press controller, and close out the tab. Let's now talk about price and compatibility. The S series clocks in at around $50 and the M series comes in at around $100, making two of these very well priced options. For PS5 compatibility, we have several options, with the first making use of a licensed PS4 controller. Now this cannot be the official DualShock 4 controller, but rather a licensed third-party PS4 controller plugged into the USB slot of your device. Our next option is a low-profile adapter, the Mayflash Magic Boots V 1.1, which goes for around $30, and it is the adapter that I would recommend since it is so small and low profile. We also have the Brook Wingman FGC at $55, and this sticks out the side of your controller the most, so it's not as low profile. However, it does have the added benefit of a USB port in the back, that way you can use it for another controller if you like, instead of having it as a dedicated adapter for your Haute42 controller, like the Mayflash one. The PXN N5 is more or less like the Magic Boots 1.1, but it does end up sticking out more, so I don't see why you would choose this over the Mayflash adapter other than availability. For Xbox Series X, S, and Xbox One compatibility, you have two main options. The Mayflash Magic X comes in at $30 and is similar to the Brook Wingman FGC in its form factor and use. The next option is the Mayflash Mag 1 FPS for $15. However, I couldn't find it anywhere, so it is likely in low production or discontinued, and your best bet is the Magic X adapter. Overall, I think these are both controllers that have potential to become your main peripheral. The only real gripe I could think of is that the menu buttons are really small and hard to press without bumping into the other ones. On the S16, they have a good amount of resistance, making it harder to press it quickly to do things like resetting training mode. But on the M16, they have a lighter press that I prefer, but they're still small. I will likely use the S16 as a travel controller, and the M16 could honestly end up being my main controller or something I bring to locals with its small size but nice weight to keep it down. For $50 for the S16 and $100 for the M16, you honestly can't go wrong. I hope this video is useful in deciding your next purchase, and please consider subscribing. Thank you.